Hello, hello. Can anyone hear me? Yes, you can, quite possibly. If you can hear me and or see me, please let us know in the chat. No one can hear us. No one can hear us. Can they or can't they? Listen. Well,
For sure you can hear
people
us.
can hear
Everyone
us.
else.
All right, fantastic. So, I want to thank everybody that has come in today. And Brooke, thank you very much. Samuel, yes, you can hear us. Sadwa, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Perfect, you can hear us. Carlo. Um, I'd love to hear where everyone is coming in from. So, Sadwa, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. If I'm not, please let me know down in the comments. Where are you from? Samuel, Brooke, Carlo, Vaishali, please let us know. Which city and or country are you currently checking in from? That will also help us to be able to identify whether or not we should run this at a different time zone for people that are checking in at 2 o'clock in the morning. Toronto, Canada, Brita. Is that the water purification tool, Brita, or are you a person? Let's find out. Sauda, Nova Scotia. All right. Samuel from Miami. Brooke is from Manchester. Eliska, Czech Republic. Amazing. Cameron, Atlanta. Stepping away for 30 seconds. I appreciate that, Cameron. Alina from Bogota, Colombia. Really cool. Jay May is from the Philippines. And Britta says, haha. Well, listen, I have a Britta downstairs. So you're going to have to prove that you are indeed a human being. Okay. You are a real person and older than the filter. Appreciate that. Thank you very much for everyone that is coming in. I am Liam Martin. I'm the co-founder and chief innovation officer, which is a name that I completely made up on my own. And I am joined by Jeff, who is the VP of engineering and also is heading our R&D team. There's Jeff right there. We're going to be able to switch back and forth. Me and Jeff are going to double team this particular presentation because for us, we actually recognized that there's probably going to be a lot of questions that pop up in the chat. And we want to be able to have you guys answer those questions, get those questions answered live while we're doing this presentation. So it was really important for Jeff to be able to come on. And hopefully Jeff has some interesting, insightful questions as well that he would like to ask. I've told Jeff that he can basically jump in and screw up my presentation whenever he wants so that it's more fun for everybody.
Thank you, Liam.
Jeff, do you have anything to say before we start off?
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that, Liam, and I look forward to jumping in. Yeah, I mean, as Liam says, ask questions in the chat and we'll pick them out and answer them so we get as much from this as possible.
Fantastic. Did everyone like the music that was run right before we jumped in? I thought that was a banger. And whoever chose that music, fantastic choice. It got me really pumped up and ready to go. I also have my little tiny Coca-Cola because I thought to myself, I need a little bit of caffeine before I get started today. So if you see me drinking a Coca-Cola at 11 a.m. my time, it's just my process. All right, so let's get into this. State of productivity and remote work. Listen, everyone really wants to get a few questions answered with regards to productivity and where it's going. And to be honest with you, I think we actually have a huge divergence in terms of understanding where remote work is. Samuel says, was a choice of music. Yeah, I agree. I mean, maybe it's not everyone's taste, Samuel, but it got me really pumped up. So there's a huge debate going on right now with regards to productivity and remote work. And who better to answer that question than the time doctors? Because we understand where that time is being spent. And we have hundreds of thousands of users that end up using our software every single day to be able to identify where are the productivity advantages, disadvantages inside of remote work. So we're going to be going through all of that. You're going to be figuring out a whole bunch of information connected to everything that you could possibly think of with regards to productivity. So let me give you a broad stroke of where we're all at. In February of 2020, 4% of the US workforce was working remotely. By March of 2020, it was 45% of the US workforce working remotely. That is the biggest shift in work since the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution took about 80 years. Jeff was at the absolute center of that, started in London in the UK. And it took 80 years for us to be able to do that, but we did this in March. So it completely changed everything that you possibly think of with regards to economics, politics, society. We have completely changed everything that we understand with regards to work. And it's not just remote work that has been significantly impacted by this. So when we look at the peak that happened in 2020, we had 45% of the US workforce working remotely. We are now sitting at, and I would love for everyone's assessment or guess, where do you think we currently sit today in July of 2023? I think we're in. Where do you think we sit in terms of the US workforce working remotely, which is a great corollary towards global remote work, which is the data set that I have. So what percentage of the US workforce do you think is currently working remotely today, including both full-time remote workers and hybrid remote workers? I'd love some guesses down in the comments. Britta says 40%. Of course she does, because obviously her water filtration system sales are going up because people are working from home more often. Sadwa says 60%. Okay, interesting. Jessica says 30%. That's a very good guess, Jessica. Nicole says 70%. Oh, Nicole, we're going to be friends. I love 70%. Shivam says 35%. All right, so the real number right now, and Jefford says 30%. Alina says 65%. Great guesses, everybody. Depending upon the data set that you take a look at, there are about 5 or 6 that have been doing estimates. Whoops, it is 26 to 34% of the US workforce that is currently working remotely. Now, even if you take that into consideration, that we're looking at 4% versus 26%, which is still a 4x plus increase in overall remote work. But here's the even crazier statistic. That number in all of these data sets is either flat or going up. So we are projected to be 50% of the US workforce working remotely by 2040. So if you think the remote work is going away, you are crazy, because the data is very, very clear that remote work is not only rebounding, but is accelerating back up to that 50% mark within the next few years.
So what are the key things driving that at the moment, do you think, Liam?
You know, it's a really interesting problem, because there's been almost a conspiratorial push back to the office. And I think that when you look at this next statistic, it's really important to be able to take in consideration where that breakdown of communication is going. 76% of employees say they are more productive when they work from home. However, 67% of managers say they aren't. Yeah. So there's a huge push and pull between management and employees. And what we're trying to really identify as Time Doctor is we are the third source of truth here. We are the people that are measuring that particular output to be able to very clearly identify for everyone, hey, listen, here's the cold hard data on productive output inside of these organizations, and you come to your own conclusions inside of your companies. I think you would probably, by the end of this presentation, I think you'll get some really interesting and insightful data on where we are currently going right now. Because I'm sure if you're a manager right now and you're sitting in the audience and you're thinking to yourself, listen, this is all well and good. Jeff and Liam are talking about, remote work and productivity and distributed teams, but this is a pipe dream, because I've had some of these questions occur over the last couple weeks. No one is productive anymore. Everyone wants to keep working from home, which is true. Everyone still does want to be able to continue to work from home. How do you actually know what our team is doing when they are working from home? Or how do we know if somebody actually needs more training? Or maybe you're like Elon Musk, who we just recently saw this clip in a piece that he did on Fox News.
Productivity issue, but it's also a moral issue. People should get off the moral high horse with the work from home, because they're asking everyone else to not work from home while they do.
Let me just see if I can get out of there. Jeff, are you back?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. I just made a really fun joke about how you love Elon so much that you drag your satellite dish everywhere that you go.
I did answer actually, but yeah, I take it wherever I go in my backpack. It enables remote work, and I find it quite ironic that Elon is actually enabling this, but also hating it at the same time. It's interesting. Right. It's interesting, I think, in that clip that he highlights it as a moral issue, and I wonder if he's talking about, his Tesla operation. We all know he's got many companies. Is he talking about software engineers versus people in manufacturing? Because he seems more willing to be able to let it happen in Twitter at the moment. So is it a moral issue when you've got people that have to be at a location and people that don't?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We love Elon, and I love Elon. You love Elon. But to be honest with you, I think he's a little bit wrong here on remote work. And it's just the reality that we need to be able to show the real data and pull out the receipts on where remote work is going and distributed work is going, and then everyone make their own conclusions. So because we have this data, we wanted to be able to present this specifically because we know Elon is quite frustrated. And if one of you guys know Elon, please send him this presentation afterwards, because we would love to be able to actually show him that the output is better and the productivity is better when you work remotely. So what you're going to learn today, remote work myths. We're going to be debunking some of the stereotypical common misconceptions about remote work. So are remote workers really spending all day on YouTube or Facebook, like a lot of people think? Unproductive and productive apps. What is actually distracting them and for how long? And is this intentional, or could it be the cause of bad processes? We're going to be looking at the top applications used and the tech stacks that remote companies use. So what does basically our extensive user base actually find productive, and recommendations for us on tools inside of your tech stack to be as productive as humanly possible. And then we're also going to have a fun one, which is global productivity by country. So we will actually be able to define where your most productive companies are and your most unproductive, organizations and countries are in our entire network, which is a little bit of a fun one, but everyone gets a kick out of it. And we're also going to show you how that data has changed over the last 3 years, which is also incredibly exciting, at least to a data nerd like me that loves this stuff. So unmasking the social media myth. Let's talk about the first big myth. Remote teams spend all day on social media getting no work done. Well, the reality is a little bit different. Only 4.4% of time on average is spent using social media apps inside of your organization. I don't know whether or not any of you thought that was higher, thought that was lower, but essentially what we would define inside of Time Doctor is if you're spending approximately 5% of your workday on social media, that's exactly where you should be in terms of your overall output. You're right within the standard deviation of social media usage inside of the average company. And any amount over that probably also isn't a problem. I would say maybe about 10% of your workday spent on social media is where I would start to have a conversation with that particular worker. But it's, and Britta actually brought up a really good comment here. I think that would depend on the type of company and position. And you're absolutely right. Someone that's doing social media management, as an example, is going to be spending 100% of their time on social media. But inside of this data set, we actually pulled out people that we believed were working primarily in social media. So we've removed that data, those users, because it was biasing the data and pulling it up automatically. So this is just for general workers, your engineers, your customer support reps, people whose job is not actually being on social media. All right, let's go to the next one here. So here's the breakdown. The average amount of time spent on social media, the number one spot goes to YouTube. That's the average of 18 minutes per day. And it's accounted for about 21% of the overall share of time on social media apps. And the next one was LinkedIn. LinkedIn was second with 20% of the share, but these users actually spent a greater portion of time than those logged into YouTube. So it equates to about 32 minutes in an 8-hour day in comparison to YouTube, which was 18 minutes in a workday. Elon Musk might be sad to learn that that Twitter fans only spend an average of 8 minutes per day on Twitter, 1.8%, tied in last place with TikTok and WeChat. And Facebook had a huge decline in usage from our last report in 2020. So it's down 7.5% to 4.6% today. So about 22 minutes of your workday is spent on Facebook in comparison to our 2020 report. And if I remember correctly, Facebook was the number one spot in the 2020 report. So Facebook has had a huge decline in terms of users. And it's really interesting to be able to see how fast what I thought a behemoth company was a few years ago drop through the system. Two other notes that I want to be able to add in here. We only track work on desktop and laptops. So even though, let's say, as an example, TikTok has very low usage, TikTok is fundamentally a mobile app. So you're probably going to see that on your mobile app system a lot more. And LinkedIn and YouTube are arguably more work related. So there's a little bit of bias there. Like if you go onto YouTube to be able to figure out a tutorial on how to set up a spreadsheet as an example, which I do a lot, that's definitely work related. And Howard, yes, WhatsApp was ranked, I believe. Or no, it was WeChat. Sorry, it was not WhatsApp. I also think probably WhatsApp is primarily a mobile app as well. So that's not something that we're really tracking on the desktop. Facebook share of time by country. This is a really interesting one. And we wanted to be able to keep this consistent throughout the data so that from our 2020 report. So highest amount of workday spent on Facebook was Ireland at 15%. And the lowest percentages of workday spent on Facebook was India, Argentina, and Spain. This is something that we really don't understand why the Irish spend so much time on Facebook. And if there are any Irish people in the chat right now, I would love to be able to figure this out because we could not figure this out ourselves. Facebook's European headquarters is in Ireland. We're thinking maybe that might be kind of connected to that, but we have no idea why it was so high. And again, Facebook's lowest percentage was India, Argentina, and Spain, and that's between 1% to 2% of an 8-hour workday. So it's between 5 to 10 minutes per day, and that's, I don't know if that's necessarily interesting or engaging information in terms of the 1% to 2%, but Ireland just seems way out of whack here. I don't know what's going on with Ireland. LinkedIn share of time by country. So highest percentage of workday spent on LinkedIn was Spain at 8%. And the lowest percentage of workday was spent on LinkedIn was Kenya at below 3%. And on average, workers spend less than 2% of their time on LinkedIn. Outliers included like Spain with 8%. And the clear winner overall, all other countries was fundamentally, we basically just spend a lot less time on LinkedIn than we do on other forms of social media. It's quite interesting. But then there's the other argument that social media, LinkedIn is maybe not necessarily the same category of social media as something like TikTok. There's a lot of work that occurs on LinkedIn. So that's another really interesting insight that we're still thinking about and processing. YouTube. So YouTube's been quite interesting. The majority of remote workers spend less than 2% of the total time on YouTube. And there are some outliers like Senegal, which spends 8% of their time on YouTube. But you can see the breakdown here. I don't know if there's any countries. I think we've had some people from Brazil that were in the chat, if I remember correctly. But generally, we're talking about a relatively low percentage. Brazil is probably like 2 to 3% of their time spent on YouTube as an entire block. Twitter, so share of time by country, highest amount of time, the country that spent the most amount of time on Twitter was Japan. And it's really interesting. 0.5% of the TD Network's workday has been spent on Twitter. And as I said before, that was a huge drop from a few years ago in comparison to our 2020 report. So quite interesting there as well. Next point is the tech stack, the data-driven look at app usage in remote work. So why is app usage important, and why do you need to be able to understand this? You really need to be able to understand what are the most popular apps which you are spending your time working on inside of your companies, and also where is that trend line going? There's actually some really interesting data here with regards to different departments and different types of professions, because there were applications that were absolutely dominant in 2020 that have completely dropped off our rankings in 2023. So really interesting to be able to look at it and see where we are sitting. So I would love some suggestions and or ideas from people down in the chat. What do you think are the top 3 applications outside of something like Chrome, as an example, because we're not really counting browsers, because we're seeing a lot of that data already, and people log into the browser and then do something else with that browser, log into another website. What do you think are the top 3 applications or websites that people use inside of their workday? So top 3 applications. What do you think, Jeff? What do you think are the top 3 applications that are used inside of someone's workday? You might be biased because you're more on the engineering side, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, I know in my department, it's VS Code, thankfully.
Okay.
But I would kind of say, yeah, we've got Salesforce, Slack. I agree with Slack. Yep. Zoom.
Yeah.
Microsoft Teams we've got coming in from Britta. So we're kind of talking generally about communication tools here. Which is interesting, yeah.
Yep, Zoom, Slack for communication. Vaisal's got Asana. Rebecca has G Suite.
Yeah,
a lot of G Suite. Interesting, very interesting. So I think this will actually blow everyone's mind. All right, is everyone ready? Jeff, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So here are the most used applications. These are the top 8 apps used by Time Doctor customers when you take out Google and browsers. Number 1 is Microsoft Teams. Who knew? Now, I knew because Slack actually only does about 25% of market share, about 75% of market share goes to Microsoft Teams. They did an amazing job at actually locking out Slack, because through Office 365, which a lot of enterprise companies use, they included Microsoft Teams in that, and it beautifully integrated with Office 365. So when you look at Slack, that had like a 3 to 4 year advantage over Microsoft Teams cleaned their clock. It was a masterstroke with regards to Microsoft. And you can see that applied through the rest of the technology stack. Microsoft understood that if they did not lock up Teams, they would lose Excel, Outlook. I can't remember what the name of that other application was. Amy had laid it out for me, MSTSC. If you know what MSTSC is, please put it down in the chat. It's at the tip of my tongue. And Skype and Word, right? So when you look at the actual applications that are used, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 applications are run by Microsoft. Microsoft is completely dominant. It is Microsoft Remote Desktop. Amy has come in and saved me in the chat. So it's Microsoft Remote Desktop. So when you look at that, it's completely dominated by Microsoft. And the only 2 applications...
I think Shubham makes a great point there, actually, that enterprise prefers suites like Microsoft, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So they've completely adopted those technology stacks. And it's also interesting to note that Microsoft is very remote focused and very remote forward thinking, which makes a lot of sense because they recognize that probably the future of their business is going to be remote. The only two applications that didn't make it was Slack and Zendesk. And so Slack is obviously a instant messaging app for work, and Zendesk is a ticketing tool for customer service. So those are our eight.
I'm really interested to see how ChatGPT is gonna start competing against these. Are people going to start to spend more of their time in their interface? I think that's something to watch.
That is something to watch there. I think you're absolutely right on that one, because I feel that when you look at, and it might not just be ChatGPT, it might be some applications built on top of ChatGPT, but we'll probably see something like that pop up in the next year or two for next year's report. Top browsers. So nothing really to report here. Chrome is absolutely dominant, and it is running 84% of the share of our time in terms of browsers. Compared to our 2020 report, Microsoft Edge actually overtook Firefox for the number 2 spot. So if anyone is interested in buying up more Microsoft stock, this would be the time. They are obliterating everyone else, and I'm blown away. I mean, I remember Microsoft Internet Explorer when Chrome came out and when Firefox came out, no one touched that thing with a 10-foot pole, but they have fought their way back to the second spot in terms of this breakdown. Safari made it onto the top 6 list, so they are at 1% approximately of our overall breakdown. And Opera, it also made it onto the list. Nominal usage and Brave usage also stayed about the same. So there was no real mix. The only big move was Microsoft Edge moving into that second category at 11%. And that's also quite interesting to be able to see where that sits. What do you think, Jeff? Is this surprising to you or unsurprising?
I mean, unsurprising, actually. Chrome adoption, Chrome adoption is something that's really doesn't surprise me, actually. Across enterprise, across smaller companies, it's very, very widely adopted.
Right. Yeah. No, it's something that if anyone was surprised, please let me know it down in the chat, because I'd love to hear what other people's perspectives are. Also, does anyone use Edge? I'm now thinking, based off this report, again, one of these insights from this data, maybe we should check out Edge and see whether or not this is something that we might want to be able to implement inside of our own companies, because I have not thought about using Microsoft's browser in almost a decade, but this data would show that they're definitely locking up market share in comparison to everybody else.
Is this driven by standardization, like Shivam mentioned? Do you think that they want a Microsoft browser in their company as well?
Right, and that's another thing that I think is that Juan says he actually says he does use Edge, and he says it's good overall. So something to take a look at. Collaboration and messaging apps. So this is also one that I think there's been a huge mix-up and change since our 2020 report. So this report shows that 10.4% of overall time tracked is spent on messaging and collaboration apps. So 10% of your workday is spent, approximately 4 hours per week is spent on collaboration apps. And the most successful remote companies know that the key to doing it right is asynchronous communication, which we have been talking about for a very long time. We wrote a book on that particular subject, which you can get at all bookstores today in North America or throughout the world, and Amazon as well. And our perspective is that if you're spending over 10% of your work week on on communication apps, you're probably spending too much time. So if you're in the 20 to 30% percentile, you want to be able to reduce that. And to be completely honest with you, I would say most asynchronous organizations, we have not done the data pull on this as of yet, but I believe most asynchronous organizations are probably looking at below 5% of their workday spent on tools like Slack, because you want to spend less time being distracted during your workday and more of your time actually doing work. Top collaboration and messaging apps for 2023 is, drum roll, Teams at 36% of the overall share in the industry. And this is a bit surprising for us because Slack users came in second place to Teams. We personally use Slack inside of our organization, so Teams has locked this up. And this is a big difference from our 2020 report, where Skype was actually leading at 42% of the entire breakdown in 2020. And we actually did a really interesting report where this was, I think, back in 2018 or 2017, where we identified when Slack would overtake Zoom. And what we didn't recognize is that Teams would overtake Slack. So it's a really interesting mix up right now. And there could be another company that comes in and locks up this entire market. But I think that Teams is doing it better than anyone else. This is a dramatic reduction, 15% in reality, with from Slack usage from Skype usage to where it was. So we're seeing, like, the beginning of the pandemic, Skype was offered as a free service. And because of that, we believe that they got initial market share. But then as people got more serious about remote work, they just started opting into tools like Slack and Teams that had more features, which is interesting. So Zoom share crumbled from 20% pre-pandemic, well, essentially beginning of pandemic in 2020, to 9%, which is another interesting one. And again, Zoom is not necessarily overall just a instant messaging app, but it is a video communication app. So this was a really interesting one for us. And then WhatsApp, which I think someone was talking about beforehand, they doubled its share to 10%, I believe, on this report. Yes, which could indicate the need for more international friendly tools. So WhatsApp is really kind of pulling up there as I believe they went up in the 2023 report compared to the 2020 report. So WhatsApp continues to gain momentum, and there might be a big opportunity there. That also shows Facebook as part of this mix up as well, because as you know, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook. This one is crazy. I didn't believe this one, and I actually had to go back to Amy, who put together this report, and I had to double check to find out what the heck is going on. Julian, who runs design in our company, shout out to Julian in the chat. He was, I think he'll actually get a really big kick out of this one as well. So design apps. Is anyone here a designer? If you are, please put it down in the chat. And I would love to hear what you're currently using as your primary design tool, because this is a bit of a crazy one. TD users spent on average 1.7% of their time using various design apps. That's across the entire network. Obviously, when we just analyze designers, that ratio would be significantly higher, but it was 1.7% across the entire network. And there's no real surprise here, but Adobe still remains king of design. Jefford says that he has designers and they usually use Figma, which is really interesting to be able to see this long term. So Adobe killed it, 36% of the share of the entire design ecosystem went to Adobe, and they are actually losing a bit of their grip on the industry. In 2020, Adobe accounted for 99% of the share across the entire design apps, including Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. So 2020 report, this was just Adobe. This was just Photoshop, Adobe Acrobat, Illustrator. It was 99% of the mix. And honestly, we've seen a massive, and I mean massive, success story with Figma. Figma captured 20% of market share as the 2023 report, our current report. And in 2020, they had zero. They basically had less than 1% of market share. Now, this is probably not surprising to everyone. I don't know if you know, but Figma, or Adobe, bought Figma for a reported $20 billion. So you can see this in the data here. And Jeff, we should really be making stock choices based off of data inside of Time Doctor, because we see this stuff happening before anyone else. It's really exciting to be able to see just these changes in the industry, because when you actually look at Acrobat 36%, Photoshop 18%, Illustrator 9%, InDesign 4%. Those are all Adobe products. And now Figma has actually been added into that mix. So they're locking out that 18%. Canva's the only one there at 13%. Now, is Canva going to get acquired by Adobe? Probably a pretty good idea, to be honest with you. If Adobe acquires Canva, I would say, based off of this data, my perspective would be that I would say, and yeah, this is my kind of crystal ball. Within the next 2 years, I think you'll see Canva get acquired by Adobe. It just seems like they've got enough market share there that the other guys are going to say, we've got to buy these people. And the other thing too is that Adobe has the money to be able to acquire Canva, so it makes perfect sense for them to be able to do it. They're a little overvalued based off of what I see with regards to Canva, but locking up that entry level market of Canva and pushing up against their other subscription tool, basically their Adobe Suite, I think is really, really interesting. I'd love to hear anyone else's perspective with regards to, Figma, Photoshop, Adobe. It looks like Eliana is using Canva, which is really interesting. Aliska uses Figma and Photoshop. And Shivam says it's interesting how Microsoft Designer would end up next year. So that's another one as well, which I think we should be watching. Jeff, any thoughts on this? I know you're not a designer, but this was to me the biggest kind of shakeup in terms of the industry.
I mean, I know that Figma is actually used a lot outside of design as well. So it's used a lot for process diagramming and things as well. So that's quite an interesting move. So it's got a wide usage too.
Yeah. Also, another one that we got to pour one out for InVision. So InVision was what we were actually using in 2019, 2020 in our design team, and everyone seemed to be using InVision. And it was actually a big chunk of it was, I think it was a couple percentage points, which is a big chunk for the 2020 report. But today, InVision is gone. It's completely disappeared from our entire ecosystem. And the reason why I find that quite sad is InVision is entirely remote. So they were remote from day one, and they built a very large business. And to be honest with you, it was going to be Figma or InVision, and Figma won in comparison to InVision. So sucks to be InVision. Hopefully they do something else and they're able to retain some type of market share. Developer apps. This is probably the one that you can speak to, Jeff, in terms of your educated guesses and perspectives. So Microsoft Visual Studio is the clear leader from the developer apps that we looked at. It had 51% market share in comparison to everyone else. And it took over Atom, which secured the top spot in our 2020 report, which was quite interesting. And then Atom was the number one developer app in our 2020 report, and they dropped to 1% market share from 69% market share in the 2020 report. What do you think about this breakdown, Jeff? What do you see? Does anything kind of surprise you here?
No, it doesn't. So I expected to see VS Code at the top, Visual Studio at the top. And with introduction of things like inline AI using things like Copilot and Copilot X for code analysis, I think that's going to get bigger. And similarly with GitHub, I'm not surprised to see that there as well. Yeah.
It's quite an interesting one that to me we're seeing, and we also don't see GitLab anywhere here, which is another one that kind of surprised me, because I always see GitHub and GitLab kind of neck and neck. Well, obviously GitHub was first, but I was seeing GitLab as a company that was kind of catching up to GitHub, but it does not look like that based off the data here. Next one is top CRMs. This is actually, well, it's surprising that it's not surprising. Same as our last report, Salesforce is keeping their top spot as a top CRM tool. That's 37% market share. However, they've lost quite a bit of their share to some new players that made it to the list this year, including HubSpot, Microsoft Dynamics, and SalesLoft. So Zoho has remained in the number 2 pick amongst our user base with 24%, biggest joiners right now, as I said before, is HubSpot and Microsoft Dynamics. So this reinforces as well how dominant Microsoft is. Like they are owning a top 5 spot of every single category that we're seeing here. And in some way, in some categories, they're absolutely dominating like the top 6 or 7 spots out of the 8 applications that we work on. But Salesforce is still currently the winner, but the other competitors are eating away at it. I would probably say we're going to continue to see that occur with regards to Salesforce, and we're going to see applications like HubSpot particularly. I would probably say HubSpot might even move up into second spot by this time next year. And Jessica, Zendesk didn't make it into the top ones because I believe we did not include Zendesk as a CRM tool. We included it as like a ticketing tool, which I think we have in one of our reports. And if not, Jessica, I will get back to you on that. Jeff, any thoughts on CRMs?
I was surprised not to see Zendesk as well, just like Jessica.
Yeah.
But yeah, Salesforce dominance.
It's crazy how much Salesforce costs. Like, so because we know that the dollars and cents, the average deployment of a Salesforce seat is $250 base deployment. And when we look at HubSpot, we're talking about a $25 base deployment. So this might actually just be an evolution of the space, which is it's not so much about feature innovation at this point. It's a market that's already recognized. Like if I have a CRM, it does pretty much the basic things that I need it to do. And Salesforce was so early, but now something like HubSpot can come in and be a real market leader on price and essentially have the same level of innovation.
Yeah, I think something that really shifts this type of analysis is, the size of the companies going remote. As we see more large enterprises go remote, we're going to see this change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. Next one, help desk apps. Here we go. All right, Jessica and Jeff, you have your answer. Excellent. So Zendesk, completely dominant, 74%. And this is, we actually have a tool specifically built for Zendesk integrations. So we have about 13,000 daily active users on Zendesk across our entire system. And we have an integration right now with Zendesk. Does anyone else use Zendesk inside of their companies at this point? If you do, please put it down in the chat. I would love to be able to hear how many people are using Zendesk here because it's absolutely dominant throughout our user base. So I'm hopeful that there are some people that use Zendesk. And so what this integration does is it allows us to be able to pull in the output data from Zendesk, MPS, ticket completion time, your CSAT score, all that kind of stuff, and then correlate that to our input metrics. How much time are you spending on a Zendesk ticket? How much time do you spend throughout your workday? How much time do you spend on video calls, as an example? And pulling all these metrics together so that we can actually give you a much clearer view of how your outputs correlate to your inputs or your inputs correlate to your outputs. And Samuel here says he uses Zoho Desk, which is not on this list, actually, which is interesting. Anyways, so we were honestly not surprised at all that Zendesk is the front runner here. Behind Zendesk, we have Freshdesk, Help Scout, and Tawk, TAWK.TO, which I didn't even know about. And they locked up 4% of market share there. What we didn't see make the top list, which was, to be honest with you, a big surprise for us, was Intercom. So Intercom has not even hit this list, and it is something that if anyone uses Intercom, please put that down in the chat as well, because it feels like it was we thought that it was going to be much bigger than what it was, but it was not. It was a very small percentage of users that use Intercom. So Zendesk is still dominant and is probably not going anywhere. So the Zendesk integration tool, this is something that we really wanted to be able to talk to everyone about inside of this call. So what it allows you to do is you can integrate things like the amount of time that you close a ticket, the amount of days that you work, the amount of hours that you work, ticket completions times per hour and per day, the interactions per hour and per day, and then correlate that to output metrics that are really important to you inside of Zendesk and inside of TimeDoctor. So if you want to optimize for high NPS activity, as an example, we can actually tell you what type of workday correlates to that type of activity, high NPS. So it's something that we would love to be able to get more users on this beta report that we are putting out. It is absolutely free if you are interested in using it. And the other part of this, which is really important for us to be able to get feedback from everyone here, is this is just our first framework that we've built for this actual application. So the long-term direction and vision inside of what we're planning on doing here is actually building. And let me see if I can bring this up. Did everyone see my new screen? Which is relatively simplistic. Yeah, I think you can see it. So it allows you to be able to correlate all of this data, like average response time, remote sessions, resolution time, CSAT, and then connect that with unproductive time, idle time, the metrics that we think are really important inside of making Zendesk work more effectively. So you can very quickly identify someone like Daryl who has a significant amount of idle time, but actually has a really high CSAT score. Well, maybe what he's doing is he's actually thinking quite deeply about whether or not he's going to answer that next ticket or how he's going to answer that next ticket. Or maybe Daryl actually works on really difficult tickets because his average resolution time is 6 hours and 15 minutes. So he's maybe like a level 2 rep, as an example, that type of a thing. So what we want to be able to do is find out what other tools you would be interested in doing an integration with. So we currently have Zendesk. Again, if you're using Zendesk, please let us know. We can set you up on this integration absolutely for free. We're going to go through that in a second here. But secondarily, if there are any other tools that you would be interested in building some integrations in where we pull the outputs from your CRM, from your ticketing tool, even maybe from your messaging tool to TimeDoctor data, we would love to be able to see it. Britta is saying ConnectWise. What is ConnectWise, Britta? That is also another one that I would love to be able to know a little bit more about. And let me actually just go back to our presentation here, which I hope was still up and running. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can pull this up. Here we go. All right. Let's go reset. Come on, baby.
So ConnectWise so Britta's saying it's a ticketing system, so it's similar to Zendesk, is that right?
Okay. Cool. Yeah, no, that's very interesting.
And Jessica's actually saying as well that she'd like to know more about the Zendesk integration. So what we can do is we just need access to your API credentials, and we can integrate your TimeDoctor data with your Zendesk data and give you a view of your team and how they're performing from a, I guess, activity perspective and an outcome perspective. And I found this hugely useful, this approach. So I run a team of 40 in about 25 different countries. And, we all use TimeDoctor, obviously, and the input metrics are great. But when I match it with the actual outcome performance metrics, gives me a real good indication to work out how I can work with each individual person and make them better at their jobs and really, really help them with their careers as well.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that is so important for us to be able to think about as we're moving forward, which is TimeDoctor is really an outcome-based organization. We measure time, but we measure time to be able to actually correlate that towards the outputs. What are you doing inside of this organization? How many webinars are you putting out? How can you do it more effectively? In the case of what we're doing right now, is huge. Quick note, unproductive applications. So our data shows that less than 10% of our time is spent on unproductive apps. And unproductive apps are actually applications that our users have self-defined as unproductive. So one user might actually define something like Netflix as unproductive, and another user that maybe works for Netflix defines it as a productive use of their time. But for us, it's when we look at the data, we've identified that about 10% of our self-defined unproductive applications are where people spend their time. And this is a stat that's pretty reassuring. The majority of remote workers are actually focused on productive work. To me, 10% of your time spent on unproductive applications, again, just to kind of give you a direction of where you should be going for distributed teams, is well within the standard deviation that everyone should be taking a look at. If you're spending half your time on unproductive applications, that's probably a time in which you would need to have a conversation with that particular worker. But if you're spending 4% of your workday, 4 hours of your 40-hour workday on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn, and again, some of these could actually be productive in the moment, but maybe they've been defined as unproductive overall, that is totally fine based off of our data that we're currently seeing. And just wanted to make that clear for everybody so that when you actually do these deployments internally of Time Doctor, those are the magic numbers that you really want to be able to take a look for, which is approximately 10% of your workday. Next, we're going to go into productivity by country. So this is really fun. It almost means nothing in terms of people's output, but everyone finds this really interesting, including me, probably Jeff, because it is so cool to kind of just see the variation in culture for productivity. And with Time Doctor, we have 113 plus different countries, which we collect data in. And we really have the best data in the world to be able to do this because we have hundreds of thousands of people's workdays locked in. So here is the first one. So with so much data to take a look at, we thought it would be best to analyze this data based on the percentage of a country's population that works at least 40 hours per week. And that's the standard that we're using. That's the way that we're collecting this data. Each country in this section represents at least 100 Time Doctor users. So we did not include any country that had less than 100 users that we could collect data on because the statistical variation is just too broad. We could have a workaholic, as an example, inside of 20 users, which wouldn't necessarily apply. And based off of that, we've got Honduras. That's got the highest percentage of the population working at least 40 hours per week. So if you are Honduran, congratulations. You are the hardest workers inside on planet Earth based off of our data. That's followed closely by India, the Dominican Republic, Norway, the Philippines, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. And does anyone want to know what the country on the absolute bottom of this list was? Because that one,
please tell us.
What do you think it is, Jeff?
I have no idea. I don't want to make any predictions.
You're not going to like it. I can tell you that. Based off of where you're located, I don't think you're going to like it, and neither do I. All right, so these are actually the overworking countries. These are the countries that work more than 45 hours per week. Jessica says France. Jessica, do you not like the French? It's interesting. All right, so overworking. In the United States, 15% of users work more than 45 hours per week, whereas 45% work 30 hours per week. So there's a high percentage of people in the United States that work more than 45 hours per week, 15%. There's a bit of a shock, and it might be indicative of the US workforce embracing more flexible work. So what we've found as a trend, which is quite interesting, is inside of these countries, inside of remote work days, the average workday expands, but the amount of time that people spend not working inside of that workday also expands. So they might take longer breaks, or they might actually go walk their dog for 15 minutes and then come back, or they might have a long conversation with their wife or their husband down in the kitchen about a particular issue. So that's an interesting one as well to be able to take into consideration to kind of like temper this data. In the UK, 14% of the population worked more than 45 hours per week. And in Australia, 19% of workers worked more than 45 hours per week. And in Canada, 13% work more than 45 hours per week. And this is really indicative of another feature that we have, or important to be able to mention another feature that we have, which is our burnout feature. So this is something that we've built a report specifically to be able to analyze worker burnout, and you can actually access it today. No problem whatsoever. I believe it's on all base deployments of Time Doctor. We thought that it was really important to be able to have that tool in place, because people that consistently spend more than 45 hours working per week have a significant increased chance of burning out in their jobs, in which they quit their job, they go somewhere else, or their overall productivity just plummets. So it's important to be able to take that into consideration. And you might even want to be able to look at your Australians, Americans, Brits, and Canadians, because those are the people that are working more than almost anyone else. Next slide here is most productive countries. This is based on countries that have had the highest percentage of workers working 40 plus hours per week, and countries spending the least amount of time on unproductive applications. So people that spend 40 hours per week, but spend the smallest amount of their time on unproductive applications. Mexico, India, and the Philippines are the most productive countries per our data. So again, just because you work an extended amount of time does not necessarily mean that you are the most productive country, right? It is measured time by outputs. And really, because we don't have a good corollary for outputs, we don't have the amount of Zendesk tickets completed for everyone throughout the system. We would love to get that data, by the way, if you can send it to us, because the more of that data that we collect, we can actually get some really interesting insights into where people are spending their time. But we use unproductive share of time as a good corollary for that. So it was Mexico, India, and the Philippines. So those are the people that spend a 40-hour work week, but they take a very small percentage of their work week is committed towards unproductive applications. This next section is pro tips. So if you are really interested in actually building out a remote first and distributed workforce, here are some pro tips to be able to really juice up the ability of everyone's productivity and output inside of those organizations based off the data that we have collected. First is, and this is not a shocker for us, is actually implement asynchronous work inside of your organization. So we believe that everyone inside of a company should, or your goal as a manager inside of an organization should be to protect your team from distractions. And unfortunately, the biggest source of distractions for workers are the manager. So being able to actually create an environment where the platform is the manager and the employee can ask questions of the process documentation or get answers inside of their project management system, as opposed to jumping onto a Zoom call with you when you might be on the other side of the planet, is the most important thing that you can do to be able to improve the percentage of deep work that workers spend throughout their work weeks. Second is promote clear work-life balance and flexible work options for workers. There is a large data set that recently got completed out of Slack, the Future Forum data set, and they identified that flexibility in terms of your schedule produced on average a 32% increase in sense of well-being for remote workers. So it's a huge increase in terms of just being able to allow people to say, yeah, you can work a 9 to 5, or you can also work a 6 to 2 if you want. Or if you want to actually work till midnight and you want to start at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, that's also fine too. It really just allows you to be able to focus on the outputs and not necessarily when you're working, but the actual work that you're producing from your time that you're spending at the computer. And also promoting regular.
That's the number one thing, Liam. When I speak to my team about what they love about asynchronous remote work and working at Time Doctor, it's that ability to have that non-linear workday and that flexibility. So that's a really,
Absolutely.
really, yeah.
And the data is very clear that we're seeing huge increases in essentially company loyalty when you can choose your own schedule, which I think is really important. It's like, get the work done, put in your hours, but you get to choose when your hours happen. And that is huge in terms of a cheat code. And I think it's actually a huge strategic advantage as well in terms of figuring out where people want to put their time and making sure that less people quit inside of your company. Next one is you need to be transparent on the work that you're doing. And so transparency is a two-sided street. It means you need to have accountability both on the employee side and the employer side. And Time Doctor is a really good bridge to be able to create that form of transparency. Right now, everyone knows that I'm working on the state of productivity in remote work webinar as an example. And we can look at all the data that we spent on actually getting to that particular webinar, that output, and analyze the inputs, the time that was spent, not only by me, but by Amy and by Shally and Jeff and everyone else on the team to be able to actually deliver this particular output. So having transparency there is critical. Next is you need to be able to set clear expectations and goals. So it's really important inside of remote teams to recognize what are your KPIs, what are your outputs that you need to be able to reach. How many webinars do I need to do? How many people do we need to have on that webinar? How many people do we need to convert from that webinar? Creating all those clear metrics so that when you actually execute on the task, you don't necessarily need to talk to management as to whether or not you are hitting or not hitting those goals. It's very black and white. Both your manager and the employee know what those goals are. And there's no discussion about whether or not those goals were concrete or not. So setting clear expectations is critical. And then 5, you need to provide the right tools to get regular feedback. So whether that's tools like Time Doctor at the very beginning of that process to be able to measure that time, whether it's the project management system like Asana that we use internally to be able to actually build out the KPIs that everyone is looking for, whether it's a spreadsheet to be able to put in the metrics, whether it's like a Bamboo HR or a 360 review tool or an EMPS, an Employee Net Promoter Score tool. These are all things that are absolutely critical towards everyone's output and making sure that everyone is staying accountable towards where we're going as a business. So I hope that anyone that is popping up right now has some questions. I would love to be able to answer your questions. Now is the time to be able to ask them. And I have one last thing that I would like to be able to show everyone. So if you have a question, please let us know down below and we will actually get into this. But I have one last thing that I want to be able to show everybody. So if you want to actually go and start your free productivity audit now, you'll actually be able to go in for people that are not currently using Time Doctor. You can get an absolutely for free productivity audit from us. And what does that actually entail? Let me actually click on that and show you what I'm talking about. So you'll actually be able to get a free productivity audit that allows you to be able to analyze everything that we just talked about, the different websites and applications that your team are using, whether they're productive, whether they're unproductive. And we'll be able to correlate that against the goals that you have inside of your organization. And we're going to actually bring in a completely free auditor that will be able to take a look at that data and give you that peace of mind that you are looking for. And our guarantee is that we will find something in that data that will be a surprise to both you and your organization. So the way that you do that, you type in your name, your email, your phone number, company size, company name, and then choose your country. It's also really important for us to be able to choose that country because we can add that to the data set. And you sign up, you get a diagnosis from Time Doctor, and then you get insights and next action steps. This is completely free. So you can sign up for this right now. We will give you a completely free audit. Again, there's no kind of loopholes or anything like that. No money will change hands. Everyone will be able to get access to it completely for free. The next thing that I want to be able to show you is if you are an existing customer of Time Doctor, let me see if I can get back here to where I was before. Probably not. Let me see if I can get back here. So there we go. Okay, so the next thing is if you are currently part of the Time Doctor family, or if you are a brand new customer that's thinking about taking the productivity audit, you can also opt in to our brand new beta program. And it's at get.timedoctor.com/beta program. For some reason, I cannot seem to click on that, but I'm going to actually throw this into a brand new window here. Does this work? Okay. Get.timedoctor.com/beta program. Please let this work. Hopefully it works. No. It's not clickable right now, but you guys get the idea. It is a tool to be able to actually produce. Darn, I have lost it completely. All right. So it is a tool that allows you to be able to opt in to our beta program. So what that allows you to be able to do is get access to, oh, there it is. Someone actually put it in the chat. Perfect. Let me click on that and see if I can bring that up for everybody. Aha, here we go. All right. So this is the way the beta program works. Again, if you're interested in getting and becoming a part of it, this is completely free as well. You'll be able to spend some deep, intimate time with Jeff, which I know everyone is going to be very, very excited about. Let me start sharing my screen, actually, and I can show you what I'm talking about here. All right, so it allows you to be part of the tip of the spear when it comes to Time Doctor. So all of the new features that we are building inside of Time Doctor, like our Zendesk integration report, we have a quick prediction tool, so we can predict with about 80-ish% accuracy rate whether or not someone will quit their job 6 months before they do. Our process paths new tool, which will allow you to be able to analyze the different processes inside of your organization and how to be able to optimize those. Those are all going to be open to you if you opt in to the beta program. You have to actively opt into it. And the exchange that we get is we are going to look at your data, and then we're going to be able to help you. You'll be able to help us enriching our understanding of where you fit as a customer and how that data comes together. And the beta program, again, is completely free. You just need to put in your email address, your first name, your last name, your company name. You sign up today, and you get stuff like early access. You get the influence product development aspect of working with us. You get exclusive webinars like this, and there's even cooler ones. Jeff shirt off some of them, to be completely honest with you. They're pretty wild. And did I just freeze? Darn. Am I still there?
Yep, you're still there. Yep, you're still there.
Oh, all right. Jeff, you take your shirts off in some of these exclusive webinars, right?
I do, but the nothing gets circulated. The videos don't get circulated. So.
Oh, okay, they're very, very private. Yes, yeah. Exactly. So there's all those types of things that happen on these webinars, and we would be very excited if you join up for that one as well, because for us, this is the stuff that that feeds us. We love this stuff. This is the stuff that, for me, I love to work on at 3 o'clock in the morning. So does Jeff and everyone else at inside of Time Doctor. So if you're interested, please do check that out as well. And if you are a brand new customer, you can absolutely opt into the beta program as well. Does anyone have any other questions that they would love to ask? Because I would love to be able to answer them, and or me and Jeff as well. And Jessica, you had like the questions there, which was Anglo. Oh, okay. Here are the really exciting ones. They're popping up already. Where do you think Threads would be in the chart if mobile apps were considered? Whoa. What do you think of that one, Jeff? Have you tried Threads yet?
I haven't. I keep on meaning to actually. It's on my list. So this is interesting. I'm not quite sure at the moment. I mean, we have to see how things are going to play out. I guess.
Yeah. So
But
for anyone that
also,
doesn't know,
it is a mobile app as well.
yes.
We've actually just released our iOS app for Time Doctor, but we're not tracking at that level. But it's definitely something we'll consider doing in the future, I think.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, Threads is a brand new application that was started by Facebook, and Zuck smelled blood in the water with regards to Twitter and Elon. So he just built basically Twitter. They will not say that it's basically Twitter, but it's basically Twitter.
Yeah,
And this is what the application looks like right now. Excuse my phone. I dropped it and one side broke. But it is really just Twitter. And I think the surprising data is that they've already collected 100 million users, and it was in 2 weeks, which is the fastest growing app ever.
yeah.
So faster than ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's Twitter without any technical debt. We've heard all the stories about the state of the code at Twitter. So they've taken Twitter engineers and written threads in a way that is clean, easy to take forward, easy to enhance. So I'm quite interested to see what happens.
Yeah, I would probably say, Carlo, probably there's a bunch of people that are trying Twitter, and then it would be really interesting to see. Yes, they have 100 million users, but how many of those are weekly actives or daily actives? I would assume a couple million, realistically, in comparison to that 100 million. So I still think that Twitter is dominant, and I've played around with it. I would say it's interesting to take a look at. To me, I kind of missed Twitter, the Twitter train, and I never really engaged with it. So for me, as someone who tries to build out these brand pieces of equity on different social platforms, Threads is kind of like me getting a chance for a second bite at the apple. So I'm going to try on Threads and just see where it goes. But Facebook has a better technical team in terms of being able to execute on this. So I would probably say it will exist somewhere. Will it be Twitter? Next 6 months will tell. Any other questions that we have? Magical person behind the scenes that did that fantastic stuff. We do. Wow, this is so cool. What are some drivers for companies to stay remote? What are some drivers for and it's said twice. What are some drivers for companies to stay remote? Why don't you talk to that, Jeff, for a little bit? What are some drivers that you see for companies to actually stay remote?
Yeah, so I would say, from my own experience, we're obviously staying remote because we've always been remote. But all of my hiring over the last 6 to 12 months, I found some amazing talent, and all that talent has come from companies that are forcing their engineers to go back to the office. So the real driver, one of the core drivers for me, is the fact that I can hire amazing talent from around the world, but also we now have a competitive advantage against other companies again, which means we can attract the best talent. If you can have a company that enables your team to work from wherever they want at whatever time they want, that's the best benefit you can offer.
Absolutely. An interesting statistic that I just heard recently is pre-pandemic, 19% of companies that started in Y Combinator, which is the best accelerator in the world for tech companies, 19% were remote before the pandemic. This last cohort, 64% of that cohort were starting remote. And I think what we're going to see is, ironically, one of the best drivers for companies to not just stay remote is to actually be remote from the get-go. And we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, as those small companies become big companies, we're probably going to see more pressure on the push back to the office to be reduced, because they're realizing that just the economics of being remote is so much more profitable. This isn't even like an employee happiness perspective. This isn't even a sense of belonging or a productivity issue. All of those numbers are good. But the bigger one is you will actually be able to extract more profit from those businesses because they are just effectively running more efficiently than businesses that are inside of an office. And so I see that as a big driver. And my perspective is we just need to wait. I think the next 5 to 10 years, we're actually going to see, as I said before, we're probably going to see 50% of companies working remotely by 2040. And I would say full salinity of remote work in terms of all job types sits at about 68%. So once we're past 50%, we are essentially there, in my opinion. And I don't think we will, I think we will see that within the decade for sure. Next question, magical person in the background. Jessica says, I totally agree. Many talents being forced is looking elsewhere. And very, very cool. All right. So if those are all the questions that we have, thank you so much for being on this session with us. We really appreciate it. And again, there's the links up there. If you want the free productivity audit, go check that out. It's get.timedoctor.com/free-productivity-audit. It is in the chat. And if you're also interested in being part of the beta program and seeing Jeff take off his shirt, beta program is a great place to be able to see that and a lot of other things that might surprise you being part of the beta program. I hope that Vinny is not on this call because I think I got in trouble with, that probably is going to get me in trouble with HR. Jeff does not actually take off his shirt unless you ask him very politely to do it. Other than that, thank you so much for being part of the session. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can email us directly, support@timedoctor.com. And thanks a lot, everybody. We are out.
Thanks, everyone.